Hi everybody, it's Luke from Foot Tech. We have got a podcast episode today all about development centres, everything you need to know, how they work, are they worth it, things to watch out for, and lots of other bits. As always, after this, if there's anything that you would like more information on, if you want to pick our brains on anything, just get in touch. As always, we're always happy to help. So let's get into it. Development centres, what are they? They are essentially made for the players, the children who are maybe not quite ready for the full academies in a professional football club. So children that are maybe pretty good, maybe pretty decent at grassroots, stand out a little bit at grassroots, but have maybe trialled in the academy and not quite ready for that step up yet. So in theory, these things are designed to keep the players in the club system to some extent, with a view of hopefully developing them, improving them to get them into the academy. Doesn't always happen like that, which is something we'll talk about today, but in theory, that is what they're about. That is what they should be doing. And this also goes for things like shadow squads, which we hear a lot about in the girls' game in particular. They work in a similar sort of way. So my experience with them is I worked for Leeds United for two or 3 years, just before I started Foot Tech, and we've also had, since we've started Foot Tech, countless children go into development centres across a number of different football clubs. So we've got a lot of experience in terms of how they work and so on. As I say, the purpose is, in theory, is to make the children better. Get them to the point where we can get them into the academy. That was the idea. Very rarely does that happen, for reasons why we'll explain in a second. But the overarching view is that they are there to hopefully keep these children within the club system, in hope that at some point maybe there's a late developer, maybe they've just seen something that they quite like, but they're just not quite there yet. And the coach in the development centres can keep an eye on them, keep progressing them, keep improving them to the point where hopefully at some point they'll get that chance in the academy and they'll take it. Does it work? Not really would be the woolly answer, and let me explain that a little bit. So let's look at the coaching. So coaches in development centres are not necessarily the best coaches. Some of them are very good, a lot of them are very good, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the club setup, your best coaches are going to be in the academy. They're going to be in the full academy, obviously. That's where they're going to be needed with those academy children. So the development centre coaches are often the best that are available at Wednesday at 5 o'clock, for example. So it's not going to be the best coaches around, it's going to be the best available at that time who aren't already coaching in the academy. So the better coaches are going to be working with those children in the academy, improving those children 2 or 3 times a week, whereas your development centre coach is perhaps going to have those children once a week for an hour, and they aren't going to be as experienced or as good, in inverted commas, as those academy coaches. So although the development centres are there to develop the players, how much development are they going to be getting compared to the academy kids that they're actually trying to compete against? So that's one thing to bear in mind with these things. I think parents get lost sometimes in a guy with a tracksuit on and a football club badge on that tracksuit and think that must mean that they're a full-time football coach and amazing at what they do. That isn't the case. Myself, when I was working at the development centre, I was also starting Foot Tech, and I also had a full-time job. You don't get paid a lot to do these things, and even in the academies at the sort of younger age groups, a lot of those coaches will not be full-time. They'll have other jobs around that. So just because you see them in a tracksuit, in a club tracksuit, doesn't mean that they are a full-time football coach that's an amazing at what they do. As I say, it's going to be the best available at that time. And that sometimes they are. Sometimes they're fantastic coaches, as I say, don't get me wrong, but it's just so parents are aware of that point. What we wanted to do today was sort of give you a bit of a visual. So if you're listening to this, I'm going to try and explain this as best I can. If you're watching this, then you'll see now we've got a whiteboard here. And what we've got is 16 circles, which represent the academy, and we've got 16 crosses, which represent the development centre. So you've got 16 kids, give or take, in each age group, across the academy and across the development centre. So the one thing that parents really need to be aware of, if you're going to these things with an expectation of getting your child into an academy, this just might set your expectations. So let's say, for example, that of the 16 children in a development centre, your child is the 16th best, okay? So what you've now got to remember is you're going to have to hope that the 15 children in front of your player improves enough to get in to that academy and replace 15 of those children, and then your player improves enough to replace the 16th best player in the academy. So you can see that the chances of that are extremely slim. So you might have it here, for example, where maybe the bottom 4 of the academy are deemed as not at the level required. Now, they would be released, but they would be given an option of going into that development centre. So if those 4 in that academy that have been released and are already deemed to be better than anybody in that development centre, they're going to be released back into this development centre. What does that mean for those players in the development centre? Those players that have already been deemed not quite good enough for the academy. So you see what I'm getting at there, that to actually get into this academy system, if you're in a development centre not being deemed yet good enough, you can understand just how difficult that is going to be. And I think that's what happens sometimes with parents, that they get a little bit blindsided by a club badge and so forth, and a development centre. We're playing in Leeds United's development centre, Man United's, Man City's, whatever it might be. But the reality of it is so difficult to get into there. And when you see a visual like this, hopefully, you'll start to see just how hard it is, because these 16 children in the academy have already been deemed better or too good for the development centre. Then after 6 weeks, 8 weeks or what have you, they're assessed and they're deemed not quite good enough. They're going to get released into the development centre, but those kids there have already been told that they're not quite ready yet. So this is the difficulty. Now, in the meantime, you have got scouts that are out every weekend watching grassroots football. So let's say this is an under-7s, an under-7s academy, and an under-7s development centre. You've got scouts that are out watching football every weekend who are trying to find more children at the academy level to get them into that academy, which will then release more from there back into the development centres. Or, equally, they're going to try and find children that they think are pretty good and maybe need to come into the development centre to be watched for a few weeks. So, again, you've not just got to hope that these 16 kids in the academy are deemed not good enough. You've then got to hope that the scouts don't find anybody else, and that your child is going to be given a chance to go trial again in that academy. But as I say, they've already been deemed not quite there yet. So this is the tough thing, and hopefully this will just set expectations a little bit, because we have some parents that are maybe blindsided by these things sometimes, which again we'll come on to in a second. But you've got to ask yourself, how many players need to leave that academy system without any scouts finding any more players before your child is going to be given an opportunity to go in there, okay? And as I said to you before, in the meantime, you've not just got the scouts and everything else, you've got the coaching. The coaches up there with their players 2 or 3 times a week, developing them probably more so than the 1 hour a week maybe that you're getting with the development centre coaches. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of an eye opener, I suppose, in terms of exactly what does need to happen. That's not to say that it's not worth it, and that's not to say that it doesn't happen. I think in the 2 years I was there, I think we had maybe one child go back up into the academy and then stayed there for a little bit. That is the reality of it. The reality of it is that the children that we had were not good enough, fundamentally, and with only an hour a week to develop them more, it was never going to happen. The academy kids were getting more coaching, and that's it. That was the bottom line. So if you are going into these things with a dream, then that's probably all it's going to stay at the moment. Not all the time, please don't get me wrong. Sometimes you've got a kid that maybe a scout has seen that he quite likes or she quite likes. Maybe they don't think they're quite good enough, so they put them in the development centre. Then all of a sudden, the coach is saying, "Oh, this kid needs to be moved up. This kid needs to be in that academy system, the elite system. Call it what you will." We were talking to a coach the other day, an academy coach, who said that he dropped by coincidentally to one of the development centres of his club, and he picked out 2 kids straight away that he thought were just too good for the development centre, so he got them up to the academy. So this can happen, don't get me wrong, but we speak to so many parents that have been in these academy systems for years. There was a boy I coached 1-to-1. I think I coached him for maybe 2.5 years, and that entire time he was in a professional club development centre, and at no point did he ever get asked to go and try for the academy. And his parents were paying. His parents were paying for the development centre. So these are things to bear in mind. Now, just on that point, you should not be paying. If you are in a club system, if you are in a professional club system as a development centre and you are told to pay a fee, run a mile. They are not worth their salt. You should not be paying to be in a development centre. And unfortunately, there's been many instances over the last few years where people have set up with a club badge and so forth, and parents have been charged. We've sent children to development centres, and parents have messaged us saying, "Oh, do you know that they're actually trying to charge us for this?" If that happens, it is getting stamped out to an extent in some places. But if that is happening and you are paying for it, please don't. You should not be. Just don't do that unless you're happy with the coach. Unless your child's happy, then maybe. But you should not be paying to be in a development centre. Other things to bear in mind are, don't expect much feedback. You will be pretty lucky to get anything of substance in terms of feedback. Again, that is changing. I think people are looking at this now because it's important that children are given feedback. But the problem with football, as we've spoke before on this podcast, football's so subjective that even if a coach of many years is giving a parent feedback based on their child and why that child's been released from the development centre or whatever, that parent might have a different opinion. It's unlike primary school teaching, where normally whatever a teacher says is pretty much gospel. Football, everyone's got an opinion, and a lot of people believe that they've got the right opinion. So feedback is often withheld. They might give you little bits and bats, quite generic, but it is often withheld because it could open up a massive can of worms, and nobody can be bothered with it ultimately. Things to think about are, is your child enjoying it, and are they actually developing? So these things are not bad. In many cases, these things are not. We're not trying to say these are bad. We're just trying to give you the reality of what to expect and what they are fundamentally. But if your child is enjoying it and they're improving, then great, carry on. Regardless of the chances of them actually getting into the full academy, if they're getting better and they're having a decent time, then yeah, crack on. That's a good thing. If those 2 boxes are ticked, then carry it on. But the other things to bear in mind are things like travel time. We know parents that will travel to the end of the world to go to these things, when if you're travelling in rush hour, school nights, the kids are getting home tired, they're tired for school the next day, and they're not really enjoying it, they're not really improving, then I think you've got a decision to make. Is there going to be something better they could do with their time? Instead of it impacting on things like school and enjoyment, it's especially now that the chances of them getting into the full academies are very slim. Is it worth it? Because maybe they'd be better off elsewhere, maybe going back into grassroots, maybe going to some sort of football development program, whatever it might be, or indeed doing a different sport completely on top of the football that they're doing at grassroots, which actually might help them improve, which actually might help their enjoyment, or join something else where they are playing another football session that's helping them improve, and therefore then further down the line they're scouted again and they go to another one of these things, who knows. But if they are not enjoying it and not developing, then you've got a decision to make, and the decision probably should be just get out of there. There's no need to be there. I think the biggest thing to bear in mind with development centres is your child's mentality. This has changed slightly in the last few years, but there's a lot of places that will still, every half term, you will get an email or a chat or a letter or whatever to say your child is coming back or your child is going to be released. Thanks but no thanks, and we'll keep an eye on you. We'll come out and see you in a few weeks or whatever at your team. That probably won't happen. So if your child can deal with that, great. But if your child is going to be absolutely distraught about being told they can't go back and play at the Leeds United Development Centre anymore, or the Man United Development Centre anymore, or the Man City Development Centre anymore, whatever it might be, then you need to weigh that up. Is it worth it? Because we see so many children that are dragged to lots of these development centres, not just one club, they might be at 2 or 3 clubs, then they go into something else, some sort of elite programme or whatever, constantly assessed. Football's meant to be a release, it's a game. Football's meant to be something that they can forget everything else, whether or not they're having a good time at school, whatever, it's their thing, their release. And if they're constantly being assessed, being told they're good enough or not good enough, how does that weigh on them? And if your child's in a position where mentally they couldn't really handle a letter saying you're not coming back anymore, then you need to decide, is it worth it, based on what we've told you today, on their chances of actually getting into that full elite level academy system. Is it worth it? That's what we'd leave you with today, is just to have a think about that. Just to wrap it up, as I say, these things are not bad. They're not bad at all. It's just some parents are not given enough information about exactly what they are and the chances of progression and so forth. We have seen children that have gone to these things that have then been released and then gone back and actually gone to the full academy. I've got one case of that. When I say we've seen children, I've got one case of that happening. We've seen children that were nowhere near anything like this and then all of a sudden are in an academy straight away. It does happen. There's exceptions to the rule. But from my experience and from the countless children that we've had from FootTech go into these things, the kids that are asked to go into an academy, drop down to a development centre and then go back to an academy, or kids that are just asked to go straight to a development centre and then go to an academy, I could probably count on one hand. So that's the reality. But as with everything, if you get offered one of these opportunities, I'd always say take it. I'd always say go and see if you like the training, go and see if your child likes the training, have a look at the setup, because it might be just a good thing. We always say just sell it to them as another training session. You're not playing for Man United, you're not playing for Leeds, you're not playing for Man City, Bradford, Doncaster, whoever. You're just going to train, you're just going to do some extra football with some new coaches and just let them see. And if you like it and they like it and you can see that they're improving a little bit, then yeah, stick with it. But just think about what we've said today, particularly that point about if they are released, what does that do to them? As we said at the start, if there's anything else you would like info on regarding development centres and what we've spoke about today, please do get in touch. If there's anything, as always, if there's anything that we can help with, we will do. But hopefully that's given you a decent understanding of what to expect and how it all works. Hope you've enjoyed listening, and we will speak to you again soon.